Can you guys hear me now? Oh man. I just got it. Thanks. Oh man, you guys are the best. Appreciate it, Tuan. So so that was that's what I had to say about today, right? Just fucking with you guys. Oh man, this fucking mic I have, right? Am I gonna start complaining? Don't I tell myself to shut the fuck up when I complain? Well, just to explain what happened is I have this mic that if you hit like this thing, it shuts off. And I think when I was moving it before I hit it. So oh man, fucking unbelievable. Anyway, welcome to the show. The show where I see how much I could do without having help. And every once in a while, pay the price. Although I did have some help. My man Tuan Tom called me and told me to turn your fucking mic on. So, all right. Well, I do have a good show planned for you guys. And what I was talking about, I think, when I realized that the mic wasn't on, was almost every topic that I talk about all the time. And that's a good thing, mind you, meaning I don't perform, some persona. I don't become somebody else before I appear, before the audience, And what that means is I get to just riff from the top of my head, and I'm always going to come back to the formulas and the models and such that I discuss all the time. And today, I have a pretty good thing planned. Right before I got on, of course, I'm like, you know what? I want to do something else. So we're still doing what I'm doing, but I wanted to also give you guys a little bit of a treat. Let me see if I could put it in the comments in the chat. Man, I hope this shit works. So literally right before I started the show, I put an article up from my mastermind. I shared it I uploaded it onto my website. Now, I'll tell you right now, you'll see a lot of stuff that I have, like the websites and different programs and stuff like that. I'd say about half of it, I know exactly what it's about. The other half, I have no fucking idea, and either rely on White Boy Pat or some Filipino to help me figure out. Or it's slowly becoming the case. My sons are being able to help me too. I don't consider myself to be one of those old guys that computers. Like, it's just that there's so fucking much, and I got shit to do, man. I just can't sit here studying this shit. Anyway, I uploaded that article, and let me see if I could bring the article up here. I might be able to. Can I bring an image file? Well, technically, it's not an image file, I guess. I'm going to fuck this up. Okay, slides and PDFs. Okay, we might be in action here. Hold on. Oh, snap. All right. Bam! All right, look at that. I'm fucking making things happen. Holy shit. All right, sounds good. By the way, shout out to everybody that's here. Aaron, Phil, Tuan Tom, obviously, Johnny Groove, Mark Norman. Who else? My man Niels. I appreciate you guys helping me out before. But what I'm sharing here, just so you guys see, this is an article that I wrote for the Mastermind group. And I wrote it this week. I wrote this yesterday and uploaded it. And Jamie, what's up, brother, man? I see you. And during the course of the week of the Mastermind group, and links in the description and all that stuff for the group. But I write multiple articles a week. I'm always trying to put things in print. We have a bunch of different talks. If you guys see, my videos that I share, like little clips that I share on social media, sometimes I'd say the majority of the times those clips come from these conversations, right from the Warrior Stream, but a significant portion of them come from the Mastermind calls. But I had a pretty productive call yesterday in the morning, and it sort of inspired me to write this article. And it's very much connected to the theme that I had already planned for today, which was the storyteller, the things that we do to tell ourselves stories. And if you guys go to the link in the description, it should be working, but I have no idea how to do this. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but what you guys could see is that article should be. Yeah, I'm trying to see if I can make it bigger. I don't think I can. It's not letting me like zoom. Nope, doesn't let me do it. But anyway, if you look, it is 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. It's a 4-page article called the Imposter Syndrome Toolkit. And I'm going to review it right now. But if you look in the link in the chat thing, you could go and actually download this. You could see the article and download it. So whereas I am going to go over it today, and I'm going to have to open it separately because I can't see anything. I'm pretty sure you guys can't fucking see it either, but just let me know. I'm assuming you guys can't read that, right? Somebody give me some feedback. Are you able to see any of the words on this? Because if not, you could download it and I'll just go over it. You don't have to see it. You can just look at my fucking ugly mug. But I really wish this thing let me get closer to it. Phil says he could read it, but he's on his computer. Yeah. Yeah, this doesn't get any closer. So you know what I'll do? I'll say fuck that thing, right? And I have it up on my computer here, and so I will use that. But basically, all of you guys can get access to this. You just have to go and download it from that link that's there, right? So let me pull this up. It would help if I was a little more organized, and I know that. But as we say in the Bronx, sometimes it be like that. All right, so a couple things we're going to go over, right? So this started with having a conversation with one of the guys in the group about imposter syndrome, and imposter syndrome being and I don't know if that was the language that he used, but it started sounding like it, and I wanted to share my take on it because I think I have a little bit of a unique take from those that I've heard other people share in how to deal with it. Because my whole thing is, and I'm not going to read this article verbatim, but I'll use this like to go over what's in the article, but just go over it organically. Whenever somebody seems to be experiencing what has been labeled imposter syndrome, it's usually that feeling. They describe it as that feeling as being an imposter, as being a fraud, being unqualified, undeserving even of the opportunity they have, or just unqualified to deal with the scenario that they're in the middle of, and they just think they're not good enough. They can't do it, and they feel to even act like they can is to be inauthentic, right? To sort of betray the trust of people that they're communicating with, and they tend to paint a picture that's similar to that. My take is much different. To me, when somebody enters a situation that is new, as a white belt would enter a martial art, there is a level of uncertainty that some people just aren't used to. And that uncertainty is the thing that makes you feel like your tools that you've used are not applicable to the situation. Because we're in a scenario we've never seen. If you guys saw the thumbnail for today's show, you are not lost, right? And this is that whole connection. Just because you're somewhere you've never been, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily lost. And I think if we were lost, that lends itself to the narrative of a lot of the takes, the common takes on what imposter syndrome is and how people tend to get there, or spiral down to there. So for me, okay, Aaron says that link isn't working anywhere. Before I end the call today, the show today, I will make sure I have the proper link. I thought that link works, but like I said, this is just fucking annoying. Copy. Can somebody check that and see if it works? That link that I shared? All right, Phil says the link worked. It might be that Canadian phone, Aaron. I'm sorry. Might be too much power, right? So the idea of being somewhere we've never been means that we're just going to have to not use tools we've never used, but sometimes we're just going to have to apply them to situations we've never had to apply them before. So I'm going to go over a couple of things here, right? So number one, it starts with the storyteller. And that was the premise for a lot of what I presented today's show to almost exclusively to be about. It's that storyteller. And in here I write, the imposter syndrome boils down to a civil war between two voices in your head, the self and the storyteller. Your self experiences what's actually happening. Your storyteller interprets it, spins it, and dramatizes it. When you feel like you're a fraud, it's not usually because of the facts. It's because the story your narrator is constructed around those facts. The storyteller in your head is very similar to what I called the first step in my program, second step strategies. We have this in SIOC Tuan Tom refers to this as the reflexive response. It is that initial reaction to a stimulus. When we have a scenario, we're exposed to, initiate that storyteller. That initial story doesn't have the same control that we would want to have over it. It's sort of like, don't think about the thing that makes me sad. It's like, well, telling myself not to think about it literally puts it on the middle of the stage in my head. So that's why, that was the premise or the preface for the second step strategy program. But when it comes to the storyteller, you got to understand that it's just a story, number one, and that you have to give yourself a little bit of patience because the storyteller needs to be trained. He can't just be commanded. You can't tell yourself, think strongly, think powerfully, think so-and-so. And as if, just saying that to yourself or acknowledging that or getting the information and now being armed with the information, as if any of those things is just going to flip a switch and you're going to stop talking shit to yourself and saying negative things to yourself when you're in a situation where there's a high level of uncertainty. I talk about in martial arts, and I brought this up before, that one of the things that happens with a lot of fighters when they, or maybe just people in fights, be a better spectrum to start. One of the reasons they become so exhausted, there's a sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline response and dump, etc., that is common because the adrenaline turns on, but the system doesn't necessarily turn off. But another thing that happens is because of the uncertainty of the physical environment in a fight, from the perspective of somebody who doesn't know how to fight or is new to fighting, their breathing cycle is affected. So the uncertainty has them taking short breaths over time or short breaths over and over again. And over time, they wind up creating a deficit and they wind up fatigued as a result of it. When the storyteller responds to a situation, we have to ask ourselves, are we looking to sort of push through that story that we've already written, or do we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, okay, is this real? Is this not real? Is this just my imagination, i.e. the storyteller, creating some sense of what's going on? And when you start thinking about it from that sort of intellectualized perspective, you tend to build a little bit more comfort with the uncertainty that you're currently being exposed to. And that's the goal right there, right? So we don't want to be put in front of uncertainty, and our brain sort of forces us to create a narrative that makes sense of it, because it will, because making sense of it gives us a little bit more seeming control over the circumstances, even if that control is only in the sort of existential stability that we have, where otherwise there would be an existential threat, right? So being able to stay who we are, mind you, the ability to resist, stress and maintain your identity is what I define self-power as. But so much of that dynamic can be measured and controlled by how much of a relationship we have with uncertainty. At what point of uncertainty do you start losing your shit? And if you start losing your shit at some point, the storyteller starts writing lose your shit type stories before that, right? And it culminates in you losing your shit, right? So certainty, uncertainty is a big sort of value you want to build a relationship with, right? So, and again, in the article I'm going to find, so I called this the imposter syndrome toolkit. And so I put a list of tools, right? We're going to tools. So that was the backdrop of what the problem usually is when you have imposter syndrome. But now let's get into the first tool. I've spoken about this before, Bayesian logic. The idea is you never want to have a complete position based on incomplete information. If new information can debunk your position, it means that your position was made prematurely. New information, new true information should never debunk a position you have, because that indicates that your position never should have been there. Now, there are going to be some times where you have to move with incomplete information. So I'm not saying, to stop movement, to paralyze yourself until you figured it out. That becomes dysfunctional really quickly. That's when people call that, analysis paralysis, and every take on that, those words, then when people describe that thing, where you're thinking instead of doing. And some people think so much, they actually think they've done something after all the thinking was done, right? Which is not the case. So movement is still mandatory, and we still need to act. But the value in understanding Bayesian logic and the Bayesian thinking is that we aren't existentially threatened when something comes to be that we don't understand, right? When something happens that we planned for not happening, and there it is, we're able to pivot, we're able to adjust. It's like we have a good enough relationship with the universe that we allow it to tell us whatever it wants to tell us, right? The difference is when people have that sort of head in the sand mindset, or maybe not the mindset, but certainly the reaction to certain situations where they're not even paying attention to the stimulus or the information that's coming from their environment past a certain point. It's too much for them, that they're overwhelmed. If you guys have studied the OODA loop, right? It's like, what is going on? The first, orient myself and observe what's going on. Then where am I in it, right? Well, when we're being overwhelmed at that scale, we will lower the scale. And that's what people do when they have a dysfunctional relationship with uncertainty. Another example of that I've spoken about before are fighters. When they first start boxing, right, doing any striking training, I've seen this hundreds, if not thousands of times at this point, where the first time people spar, as soon as somebody's swinging at them, they're turning their head. I'll give you an example. My sons, we just had a sparring day on Sunday, and the particular exercise we were doing, it was a takedown drill with MMA gloves and body punches. So they weren't allowed to get punched in the face. Yet my sons, who don't have an extensive amount of experience sparring yet, were still finding themselves turning their head and looking away. And it's like, he can't hit you in the face, right? And I have to keep reiterating that to be able to, so they can actually benefit from the exercise. But that's the thing. It's like, they don't understand yet what the uncertainty is. They haven't built a relationship with it. So they have a reflective response that does not match what they consciously want the response to be. There's going to be a time where they have to work through that, right? And Bayesian logic allows us to do that. So when they are, when students in general of mine are getting frustrated, when they're frustrated, that means that an expectation wasn't met. That means that they are literally in real time betraying what we would call Bayesian logic. Every time you are frustrated because something happened that you did not want to happen, you did not expect to happen, you did not plan to happen. And my whole thing is we could hope things happen, right? As they say in SciAc, though, hope is not a plan. So we hope, we move, but we respond to what happens as we move. We don't undermine our positions or our relationship with what's happening to the point where we start getting frustrated when things don't start working, right? Happens all the time, with students. They'll get submitted and they're screaming and they're carrying on. I used to have this one guy who was a medical doctor, by the way. Whenever he got submitted, he would curse, he would get off the mat, grab his shit, and walk out the door. And then he'd show up the next class like nothing happened because he was a little fucking crazy, right? And what is it? He has this relationship with expectation that probably drove him to a lot of his successes in life, his inability to accept, the feedback that reality is giving him. But the cost is a pretty heavy one, right? The cost is a heavy one. All right. So, number 2, the quantum leap protocol. So this I went over. This is one of the things that I implemented the last time I ran the pressure process sprint, which was, I think, a few months back. And I'll be running a sprint in the next coming months, probably around the beginning of the year. But this is one of the things that I found to be incredibly effective in helping the people that were in the sprint program. If you guys remember, during the late 80s, I think early 90s, there was a TV show called Quantum Leap. And Quantum Leap, one of my favorite shows back in the day. And it centered around this guy, this scientist, Samuel Beckett, something like that. Sam, we'll call him. He was caught in this time machine, basically. And he would jump from timeline to timeline, but he himself wouldn't appear. His identity, I don't know who he was, his program, right? He, right, the actor, I could probably use a better way to explain it, but I think you guys will get the gist in a second. He would basically appear in somebody in that timeline, right? And you would be able to tell, one of the things that they used in the show to illustrate it is if he looked in the mirror, he would see the person that he inhabited. He sort of possessed them, right? So he would see the person he inhabited, but everybody else would see that person when they looked at him. And every episode of the show was he went there, he had to figure out what was wrong because the machine would put him into somebody's persona because he had to fix something that was happening to them, undo something that was wrong. And the whole episode was he'd jump into somebody's, life. He'd have to figure out what was going on. Once he made sense of it, he would take action to be able to set things right. And as soon as he set things right, he knew he did it right because he would phase out of that person's life. And then next episode, he'd jump into somebody else's life. And that was called the quantum leap, right? So the quantum leap protocol, I have to find a shorter way of fucking summarizing that show. But the quantum leap protocol is when we take what would conceptually, abstractly be the perfect version of who we are, the most powerful version of who we are, the flawless version of who we are. In Tribalnomics, I refer to this as our pure self, right? And it's just the pinnacle of our fully developed persona with no flaws. If we were to play, and this is the quantum leap protocol, a mental exercise where we ask ourselves, okay, if I was just jumping in to this moment of my life as the best version of me, but I wasn't bogged down by everything that had happened just preceding this moment and all of the stories that are already creating momentum in my head. If I started with a clean slate, just like the Quantum Leap show, somebody jumped into my life at this point and just took inventory of what was happening, what would be the best action to take? And the Quantum Leap protocol is a way to sort of free ourselves from the weight of those bad stories in a way that allows us to start moving as quickly as possible, right? So that's the Quantum Leap protocol. Do me a favor, you guys are watching this, like the video. I got to keep fucking reminding myself to remind you guys of that, but I'm always I have these great conversations. There's usually a few dozen people watching these things. And then afterwards, it's oh, fuck, I didn't ask for any of that. So just like the video, subscribe, all that stuff. If you comment, you can comment in the chat, but also comment if you can on the actual video itself. I don't know how you would do that on Facebook. I think it's the same thing. The chat and the comments are the same, but on YouTube, it's different. So if you're watching on YouTube, hit me up over there too. All right. Roland, what's going on, brother? Man, good to see you. I see you there. All right. So the next thing, expect, this is the next tool. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. Next tool. Second step strategy, which I kind of mentioned earlier. Second step strategy, and I have a whole program about it. You go to mastergym.com. I think it's there under programs. Second step strategy is the process or the system by which we relegate ourselves to controlling the second reaction. The first reaction we know is going to be a reflexive reaction. It's going to be driven by the subconscious. We cannot command our subconscious. We can only train it. We can only program it so that it adopts and overlaps to what we prefer over time. I'm somebody who, when I first started sparring, like anybody else, closing my eyes, turning, that was my reflexive response. But now my reflexive response is functional because over time it's been trained, right? And we could do that with any dysfunctional reflexive response that we have, right? But second step strategy is how we best put ourselves in a position to do that. We do it by conceding that first step and owning the second. And what that does is it prevents us from spiraling into frustration when we react to a situation in a way we didn't want to react, or we would have preferred we reacted differently. But now it's sort of like the sunk cost fallacy, where now we lost the first rep, but now we spend the second rep getting frustrated about the first rep. And then it takes a couple of reps to get back on track and say, okay, now I got to do something that's actually going to help the situation. So second step strategy is that approach. The next tool, expectation calibration. So I'm going to read this from the article. If you guys look in the chat, I'm going to put the link here again. All right, so there's the link again if you guys hadn't seen it, to get this article that I'm just covering. But tool 4 is expectation calibration. Now, earlier on, I mentioned, the white belt mindset. And in Code of 47, which is something that I wrote, probably like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, which is just a list of 47 codes. One of them is be a white belt in any new endeavor. I had mentioned this earlier, that when we enter a situation with a certain level of expectation and we get frustrated, it means that we expected something that we had absolutely no right to expect. Now, we had no right to expect it because we should not have expected it, because here's the outcome and our expectations weren't met. But rather than just looking at it from like get over it when you get upset, looking at it a little bit more preemptively, how do we prime ourselves to not run into this problem? We enter into a new situation telling ourselves, I don't know everything here. I'm going to have to be coachable here. I'm going to have to listen to people who are better at this than I am. And I am not going to be good at it probably for a while. It's going to take some time. Some of these things I'm going to get like this. Some of these things are going to take a bit. And there might be people who move at a faster pace than me, just like people that are going to be moving at a slower pace than me. But when we have this sort of white belt mindset, when we start something new, it calibrates our expectation on the front end. So we have to do less damage control or catharsis on the back end, right? That sort of frustration that you get from things not going your way. It's like, well, if you thought about this properly beforehand, you never would have expected this to be anything other than it is anyway. Right? So I hope that makes sense. All right. This is the 5th tool. How many tools are there? There are 7 tools. The 5th tool, mission immunity, right? Imposter syndrome feeds on comparison like oxygen feeds a fire. How do we remedy this? And it's a focus on our mission. Now, I created a scenario here, and I will reproduce that just quickly. If I told somebody that, or if I told myself my mission is to go north, and somebody calls me and goes, "Hey, I'm going to a store in the north," and somebody calls me from a store in the south and goes, "Hey, you're going the wrong way, you fucking idiot. Our store is the opposite way." They're criticizing the way that I'm going because the context of their criticism is that I would be driving to their store in the south. But my mission is to go to a store in the north. Because that is the context they're using, you can understand why they would have a criticism. If I understand my mission, I am not going to weigh their criticism at all. It's going to be insignificant. I'm almost going to be indifferent to it, ideally. I don't want to become, triggered by their criticism or react to their criticism. I want to build indifference, but it comes from understanding where I'm supposed to go. But here's the thing. If we don't understand what our mission is, if we don't understand what we're trying to do, we wind up adopting these protocols that tell us, well, if we're getting criticized, we're doing the wrong thing, as if that's this sort of universal, general just position that's going to help us. Well, I'm just going to move in a way where I don't get criticized. Well, I consider all of us to be men and women of action. Like, we know that you're never going to get along with everybody, but a lot of frail people, young people, people who are maybe dealing with a smaller level of scale, sometimes they still act like, yeah, I could get along with everybody. I can make everybody happy. I don't want to look stupid, right? That's a big one. I don't want to look stupid. It's like, I'm not worried about looking stupid to stupid people. I'm not worried about looking like I'm doing the wrong thing to somebody who expects me to do the wrong thing, to somebody who their right thing is my wrong thing. If I'm a vegan and somebody says, "Oh, you don't even eat meat," if I'm a vegan, I wouldn't take that as an insult because, my mission is not overlapped with theirs. So the morality that they have sort of designed from the pursuit of their own mission just isn't compatible with mine. So their criticism is invalid, right? It's not even applicable to me. And that's what, when you have mission immunity, that's what that means. It means having a level of understanding of what you're trying to do to where you are indifferent to any criticism of your movement, right? From people who are unqualified, right? Hope that makes sense. Caleb, what's up, Caleb? Caleb writes, ego is a huge cause of that frustration. I'm working on being more present and different or detached from criticism. It absolutely, ego is a thing, but I would not advocate for looking at it through that lens. And here's the thing, like, I am not a fan of Freud. I'm not a fan of psychoanalysis. I've said before that, therapy itself is like where men try to speak like women in order to feel like better men. It's not a thing, right? I don't even think that therapy is good for women either. But I know a lot more personally that it will sabotage and disrupt a man's progress by just negating all of those drives and instincts that he has, leading him. I think a man needs to look less at his ego necessarily, and I understand, depending on the how you're defining ego, a lot of that could overlap with my use of the term identity. But the point I'm trying to make is, if we are focused on mission, we could ask ourselves, are we moving towards mission or are we not? Can I move more effectively towards mission? And what can I do to make sure that happens? I believe in a very action-oriented, a very movement-driven reaction and response to these struggles and obstacles that we face. Because so much of it is, we spend all the time battling these abstract models or trying to implement these abstract strategies. And we start thinking about ways to get through problems that were caused by thinking, and there's a point where it's like trying to eat a poisonous fish that if you cook it right, it's delicious. But if you don't cook it right, you die. My whole thing is there are other things that are delicious. We don't need to try and figure that out. So, whereas I do agree with what you're saying, when I give a sort of feedback for somebody to sort of drive, okay, what's the plan? I tend to not put that there, at front and center when we're dealing with this. I hope that makes sense, right? In other words, when it comes to frustration, think about mission and add context based on mission. It's very hard for people, especially nowadays, the younger generation that's growing up on social media, where so much of their identity is, am I getting this approval from strangers or not? And this, goes into what I was just saying before. It's like if they're trying to build a better identity with the interaction of these people, they're still including these people, right? They're still including that process in developing who they are. My whole thing is, specific to that situation, and I tell my kids this, like, you can't give a fuck what people think about you, who are strangers outside, your tribe. But in order to do that, in order to not give a fuck of what some people think, you have to give a fuck about what other people think. So the thing is, rather than just spending time saying, I'm not paying attention to that, what I'm saying is, rather than not paying attention to something, let's figure out what we should be paying attention to, right? So if we're proactively getting after something, we don't define ourselves as moving away from something else. Because if we're defining ourselves as moving away from something else, we have to understand the other thing is still controlling us. Because how they move, we move opposite them. So they are indirectly telling us who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do, right? Hope that makes sense. Tool 6, the bear and the fork, right? This comes from a story that I had told a few months back, this particular story of the bear and the fork, where I asked, if you were in the woods and you had a plate of food and a fork, and a grizzly bear turns the corner and looks at you like it's lunch, right? You're eating your lunch, it's looking at you like your lunch. It's like, what will you do? And the answer is try to kill a bear with a fork. You don't have a gun. You don't have like all of that, right? I'm the fucking dungeon master here, right? All you have is a fork and a plate of food. And some people would say to that, yeah, well, you'll never kill a bear with a fork. To which my response is, well, what the fuck are you supposed to do? Just lay down and die? Or maybe just hand the fork to the bear and lay down, right? So it can eat you like a gentleman, right? So the idea of this tool is you do with what you have. The whole idea of, being prepared for a situation, we can't let that lose its value just because we understand we're never going to be prepared fully. And because there is some uncertainty or there's some deficit in what we logically think that we'll be able to do and what needs to get done, like there's a certain point where it's like, well, we still got to move. We still got to do what we got to do. Right? So I hope that makes sense. You use what you have to do what you got to do. And spending time about what you don't have does not do anything to the situation you're in. It sounds simple. It sounds obvious. But if we take this and we look at different struggles we had in our lives, I guarantee you'll find overlap. Right? I didn't pull this out of the fucking thin air here. This is something that, me as, I've coached men 15 years in non-martial arts, like business mindset coaching, pressure coaching, which I call it. Prior to that, another, since early 2000 coaching men in martial arts. But I've seen so many men get this wrong. I remember, I would use when any of you guys are familiar with jiu-jitsu or MMA, I would talk about the triangle, leg lock, right? Or submission, you done with your legs. I have Minecraft legs. Like, you're not doing a triangle with my legs. But I still found a way to modify that technique to be able to use my legs to do it, right? I call it the rectangle, right? A little different. If you look up Master Chin Master Chim flying rectangle, you'll find a video of me using it. But that's me just, I'm trying to kill a bear with a fork, and it's just a different mindset. And sometimes we wind up wasting energy and we're getting in our own way just because we're complaining about the tools that we don't have, right? And number 7, all right, this is the 7th tool in the article. By the way, the article covers all of these tools with a little bit more of an organized presentation that I'm just riffing on, but I hope you guys are getting a kick out of it anyway. But the 7th one is my idea of delusional confidence. And I teach this concept by talking about a hypothetical of cornering an MMA fighter. And this has never specifically happened, but truth be told, it is a composite of probably 50, matches that I've cornered before. Guy gets his ass kicked first round. Guy gets his ass kicked second round. Now here we are he's sitting on the stool, and we got 60 seconds. It's the break between the second and third round. And he looks at me and he goes, MC, what should I do? If I'm just talking about probability and logic and rationality, I say, well, Mr. Fighter, you got your ass kicked the first round. You got your ass kicked the second round. In all likelihood, you're probably going to get your ass kicked the third round. And if you're probably going to get your ass kicked the third round, that means you're probably going to expose yourself to injury. You can't win the fight. You're not going to get any more money by getting injured. So if we're just following the probabilistic logic of the situation, we could conclude, I would argue, you probably should just throw the towel in. We probably should just quit because you're not going to win the fight. But obviously we don't fucking do that, because here's the thing. Even though him getting his ass kicked is a high probability, it is not a certainty. And because it's not a certainty, I don't talk about probability. When Nietzsche criticizes, the limits of the rational mind and a lot of the shit that he gives Socrates, it's really based in this. It's like, oh, you figured it out at such a high level, your answer is to not try and fucking live. Your answer is to not be a crusher. So when I have that fighter caught in between second and third rounds and he's asking me, I'm not talking to him about what's the probability. I'm not talking to him about even how he did before. I might not even talk about technique. I start bringing up his upbringing, his ancestors, his kids in the audience, the single mom that struggled to feed him, who's looking at him and wants to be proud. I'm giving a fucking Rambo speech, a Braveheart speech. I'm giving one of the, meant Rocky, not Rambo. I don't think Rambo did a lot of talking. But I'm trying to give one of these motivational things that fires him up, because ironically, that is what increases the probability of him winning. And so delusional confidence is made for those times where rationality, statistics, like, it'll betray us and we still got to move. So we're just going to figure out and make it fucking happen. Right. So, all right. So I put those links in the chat, or the link in the chat for the article. The article is called The Imposter Syndrome Toolkit. I just went over all 7 tools that are in the toolkit. Those of you that are watching this and getting that, and you're not getting my emails, go to masterchimletter.com and get the emails. Those of you men out there who want to join the group, where these are the types of things that we're talking about, might I remind you, this toolkit was produced after a conversation with one of the members during one of our mastermind calls. So this is the type of work that we do. All that information's in the description. I'm going to stop there. I think I got everything out. I went through everything. I appreciate you guys watching this. I'm glad I found a way to turn my fucking microphone on. Masterchimletter.com. Get the emails. I'm here every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. I will see you next week. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.